Back in the 60s, there was a whole different milieu for the whole law enforcement or judicial branch. One of my first cases, well, I guess I'd been practicing 3 years, was kind of a tragedy. This guy and his girlfriend had broken up, and he went to this bar on Federal, had a few drinks, and his girlfriend waited down the road. And when he pulled out of the bar, she pulled out in the road and had a head-on collision with him.
Oh.
So she died, and it was a lot of highly publicized thing. But nobody really went after blood because they could understand it was one of these anomalous things where punishment wouldn't have been appropriate. So then another one, there was a guy at the curve at Longmont, and he was going a little fast, and he was in a rollover wreck. And again, I had an engineer talk about how it was poorly designed at the trial, and I got some concessions there. With dichotomous behavior we got today, that wouldn't have happened. And same way with juvenile cases I did. I've defended kids for much less than what I did when I was a kid. And we've got a lot less tolerance. And those are the things that I was trying to document and think about in my writings. One of the things that I came up with in my series on sociology of law was that what has happened in the last several years is you've got a transition of law, and we went from the concept of a mix to a salad bowl. And we're supposed to be a common law jurisdiction. Well, you can't be common law unless there's commonality, and there can't be commonality if everybody doesn't speak the same language. So one of the examples I used before in some of my lectures is I would say et tu brute.
What does that mean?
Okay, everybody my age knows what that is because we had the Dick and Jane curriculum and all that.
Yeah.
It's a quote from the play by Shakespeare of Julius Caesar.
Okay.
And you could assume everybody in my group understood that. You can't understand that now.
Yeah.
So there aren't any understandings. So in common law, everybody's assumed to know the law. How are you going to understand what the law is if you don't understand what it is? So what we've done is we've had a turf war within law that people don't understand. But my practice was caught up in the middle of this. So the first thing that happened was the women's movement, and it was interesting because it was part this, part that. Nobody really knew how to redefine things, but every prosecutor in every jurisdiction was defining it differently as far as punishment, view, who to prosecute, etc.
Yeah.
One of the ironies that they still haven't addressed is I never did any domestic law, but sometimes colleagues report that a woman would get her husband arrested and then have no way of supporting herself.
Oof. Yeah.
And some of the research said that really wasn't the way to go. But it was the reason it was going is because they wanted to establish that precedent in the system.
Yeah.
That is wrong. Now, a rational way would have been try to educate people that's wrong, etc., or cultural change.
Mm-hmm.
But the radicals on that side, well, let's just arrest them. And there's a couple of studies that arrest no matter what, arrest first. And then they started punishing by raising bail. And it was to teach the person a lesson, but more importantly, to send a message. And that's one of the things that started happening when we turned into a postmodern society. We started sending messages.
Yeah.
And that is totally against what law should be about.
Yeah.
I don't prosecute you because I caught you doing something, and I want to send a message to the community. I didn't like what you did.
Yeah.
You should be determined on your own guilt and innocence.
Mm-hmm.
And younger prosecutors don't understand that. Lots of articles are written on that, and they don't seem to have read them.
Mm-hmm.
So then you had this thing called domestic violence.
Yeah.
What the hell's that? It can be defined in any way you want it to be. Domestic violence, if you're living in a trailer park and arguing, is a lot different than if you're on a 20-acre ranch.
True.
So it's discriminatory in its nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're not addressing that because it's politically incorrect to do so.
Yeah.
And that's how the changes is occurring. So whoever has the power to define behavior. And that's why you get so many differences.
Oh yeah, so many variations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then you get different degrees of homicide and things like this. On top of that, then you have propagandization. So when I first started practicing, I did a lot of organized crime cases, a lot of different criminal cases. And I used to talk to the press all the time. I haven't had speak with any reporter for 30 years because all the police agencies now have their own PR departments and they spin the stories they want. So we're getting a propagandized view of law and order as it is. And that's sort of a broad outline of what's happened the last half centuries.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you like to delve more into it, or?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I've been writing about for the last 20 years or so since I started studying postmodernism.
Okay.
And one of the things that's really curious is, in fact, my therapist and I were just having this discussion about the Floyd case.
Oh yeah.
He had a thing on his neck, a knee on his neck for 9 minutes and died. And here's an educated person, physical therapist, and her question was, what about the drug thing? And my answer was, so what?
Yeah.
In other words, does that excuse murder?
No. No. Yeah.
And
not.
that sort of bothered a few people. But if you don't train your people to handle situations like that, you should put them back in a patrol car or fire their asses.
Yeah. Yeah. Harsher guidelines, maybe, therapists.
And one of the things that never is reviewed is the Nuremberg defense that the cops are using.
Yeah.
I'm just following orders, or I'm following training, etc. Well, nobody's questioning what kind of manual are you reading that tells you to do this.
Yeah.
What is the procedure? Nobody's examining that.
Yeah.
And if you can't refine and define the curriculum, it's no good.
Sure. Yeah.
And nobody's really questioning that.
There has to be growth and change in there.
Yeah, well, sure there does.
Yeah.
And, it's the dumbass judges and the prosecutors that want things their way, and they're used to getting things way. And they don't want to change. They don't want fairness. They want to process cases.
Yeah.
Get a judge now is getting a stack of cases from here to there with the least amount of resistance.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter what the result is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's getting worse and worse and worse. And it's a numerical thing.
Yeah. They're worried about their career more than the case.
No, they perceive their jobs differently. It's a matter of perception.
Is it? Okay.
Now, when I was in law school and in graduate school in criminology, we studied causation.
Yeah.
What causes this? What causes that? Under the Nixon administration, that branch of criminology died, and they changed the field into police science. So you don't study what causes crime, or the ramifications of it. Criminal justice is how can you lock up more people more quickly, more efficiently.
Yeah.
And there's
almost become a police state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's sort of the end result of that.
Yeah.
But nobody's really looking that deeply at it because you have all these special laws, the martial law, the Johnny law, named after certain tragic incidences. And since they can't be sensitive, they're honoring these dead people with certain laws that don't make a lot of sense sometimes.
Yeah.
But they get the publicity, and it's like saying, I feel your pain, when all these politicians don't. They don't give a shit by
Yeah.
But they put on a good show because it's all image.
Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah. How do we get past that? How do we?
Well, it's like the tu brute. We have to commonize our knowledge base.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, one of the factors is talking to tech companies, things like that. I've had lots of instances where I've had breakdowns in electrical equipment or ATT, whatever, and they have the phone banks.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people working there I can't understand.
Yep. Or do a lot of them know actually what they're doing with the phone?
Yes. But that's the show of having service.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is you got no remedy for that.
Yeah.
I'm sitting wasting 20 times or 20 minutes on somebody in Manila, and they're screening, and we're not getting to any problem solving.
Yeah.
And every time they switch you got to go through the whole thing again. Well, if it were up to me, I'd start charging these bastards for wasting my time. And that's sort of the stuff that's going on. We're trying to automate things. We're trying to make things run smoothly, and we're training people to think that's the way it should be. And I don't know whether that can be done or not.
I don't know. I think you lose a lot of the, like the fruit, I guess, to say when you try and automate it like that. Just like you're saying, when you call the guy in Malaysia, and then you have to, go through him, and then you get transferred, and you have to go through somebody else, and you lose that connection piece. You're losing so much.
There's a linguistic problem too.
Yeah, the linguistics, the content,
So with the whole salad bowl concept, you don't have any mix.
Yeah.
And it's a lot different the way people relate to each other. And with that, without knowing them, without having sort of an appreciation for the greater good, you've got conflict between races and things. You have ethnic identities.
Yeah.
And one thing I was thinking of the other day, I had this guy named Robert Quintana, and I represented the whole family, and they were bookmakers, gamblers, etc. And so he got convicted of loan sharking in federal court, and they sent him to La Tuna in Texas, or actually New Mexico or Texas, one of the other. And that was also a holding station and an incarceration station for illegal immigrants, illegal entrance to the United States. So it was maybe 70-80% Hispanic. So he gets there, he gets in his cell. The next thing I do, I know I'm getting a call. And he said, I don't care how you do it, rent a private plane or something, but get your ass down there right away. Well, I got in the plane. I said, what's the matter, Robert? He said, these people don't believe I don't speak Spanish. See, he grew up in North Denver, and his father was particularly concerned that he fit in and be part of the community. And they had that pride in the community. North Denver is still structured that way. So it put him in a real quandary because a lot of those were bilingual or spoke no English at all. And he thought they thought he was uppity and being a snob, etc. And they were threatening to kill him.
Yep.
That's how offended they were.
Wow.
And it's a serious situation.
Yeah. What'd you do?
I went to see the warden and got him transferred.
Yeah.
There's nothing else I could do.
Yeah. Oh.
Now, as far as the lobbying of the women's lobby, that had some unfortunate things too. They wanted to demonstrate, they wanted to show they want this, wanted to show they want that, they want certain rights, all of which most of us agreed with, but it's the manner on which they did it. So I was working on a case, and the guy was Southeast Asian royalty. and he was accused of rape. So they arrest him, process him, and he's a prince. We go to trial, and he's accused of rape. Now, what had happened, there was this cute little immigrant girl, and he went out with her. They had sex. So, under the custom of that nation, if you have sex with somebody, it's a manner of engagement. So the girl afterwards says, "Does that mean we're engaged now?" And he says, "Oh, no, that was the old country. You're American." I mean, the guy was really an asshole.
Yeah.
So there was a Mormon missionary that offered to be an interpreter. And he had an agenda too. He was trying to Christianize everybody. And he didn't want to break down the royalty. So there's a lot of misconfusion. And this is a real interesting case. So we get there, and the DA's office in Denver had a special prosecutor for women's matters. And we go to court, have a preliminary hearing, and the girl starts nodding off on the witness stand. And
oh, good luck.
So I stopped the trial, and I said, I don't know what's wrong here, but she ought to be looked at. Well, they called the EMTs, and she was dopey, etc. Well, the know-it-all deputy district attorney in charge of the women's section said, "I know she's just nervous having to testify about this rape, and we'll give her a Valium." So they unbuttoned her shirt, and she's got a thin thing printed on her bra. And it said, "I can't stand the dishonor to my family by prosecuting our prince, and therefore I'm ending it." Now, that's a big thing what's going on. And one of the conflicts, what culture is going to dominate? If you don't have a dominant culture, what are the rules?
Yeah. Yeah.
And because of the political agenda of this particular deputy DA, that girl was almost killed.
Jeez. Wow.
And there's all kinds of things that happen throughout that. And the law is becoming less and less forgiving, and they're exerting themselves. My niece is a high-ranking sheriff's officer in Los Angeles County. And we were on a ferry boat in Massachusetts. And there was this British guy I was talking to. He was a Bobby.
Yeah.
And he was from one of the big industrial towns there, I forget, Sheffield or something like that. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about this problem. And I said, "You guys still don't carry weapons, do you?" This was only 4 or 5 years ago. He said, "No." And I said, "Well, what if there's a bar fight or something like that?" And he said, "Even in the soccer stadiums, if I can't handle the crowd with my nightstick, I'm resigning."
That's a good outlook.
Well, I called my niece over. She just couldn't believe that. Now, that reflects training, too, and attitude. Now, you see here in Boulder, there was a guy going berserk near one of the dorms, and he was on a second floor, a balcony, and waving a wrench around, and cops shot and killed him because he wouldn't put down the wrench. Now, to me, that's inexcusable.
Yeah.
That's somebody looking for an excuse to go hunting.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. And if I ran a police force and one of my people did that, he'd either go get retrained or more likely be fired.
Yeah.
So why isn't that occurring? Why isn't somebody examining that? Well, we are all poor cops, this, that, and the other. Well, so what for poor cops? It's just, you don't let them use the Nuremberg offense.
Yeah.
Every Jew sent to a crematorium in Germany was sent there pursuant to a valid court order, which means they had a hearing and a judge signed off on it. Now, does that give all those people a license to kill? No. You got to use a little common sense. There's another thing happened at the university. A guy was in the hallway or stairway, and he was acting out or acting crazy, and he had a knife, and they shot him. Now, where I grew up in Loveland, we had beet farmers, migrant workers, and things like that. And I faced off with beet knives, which are a lot more dangerous than a regular knife. And that was one of the survival skills you use. And ordinarily, I never got in one of those beet knife fights. It has a hook on the end, you pull the beet out, chop the dog. But what it was is a show of force, this teenage gang behavior, this group and that group, and they sit and stare at each other, call each other names. So none of them were really dangerous situations.
Yeah.
But a journalist or a poorly trained person could have made it into something. And when you make it into something, you don't know what's going to happen.
True.
And after the Chicago Convention in '68, they did a study of that. And it showed that there wasn't any real problem until the Chicago police showed up. So we got to look at that.
Yeah.
This research has been out there since '68. Who's talking about it? Who's doing something about it? Nobody, because it's not what the public wants. Because the government is selling fear like Procter and Gamble sells soap.
True.
And you look at some of these things, they're afraid. Why are they afraid? Because they don't know any better.
Oh, yeah. That goes down to the education system at that point.
Now, if I, as a farm kid, ranch kid from Colorado, can go work with Blackstone Rangers in Chicago, where I'd never seen a black until I got to college.
Yeah.
And I could do that without any fear. Why can't somebody sophisticated and growing up in an urban environment do that?
Yeah.
Is anyone asking that question?
No. I think, yeah. Privilege, that's what privilege is.
Well, I don't know if the privilege, I think it's more of ignorance.
Okay.
See,
Yeah.
That's another thing that's happening. No matter what happens, we're propagandized to think in a certain way.
Yeah.
So I was with King for a while on some of his things.
Okay.
And he had the press and he got the publicity and things like that. And he had the I had a dream speech. And all of that circulation, all of that activity was based on black versus white, and let's get the two together.
Yeah.
Well, about the time he was murdered, he stopped talking about black versus white. He started talking about black and white together.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden he had to go.
Yeah.
So I suspect in my heart that there's something more to this than white privilege. They wanted to think white privilege. What they want to do is keep the class warfare going.
Yeah. Keep us separated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's exactly what's going on in the news.
And you can correlate it with the decline of labor unions and other things else.
Yeah.
With the massive distribution. And this is what a study, I forget the name of it. It was called Going Postal. A sociologist wrote it beginning or after Reagan. And he correlated the distribution of wealth and the squeezing of the middle class and correlated with acts of violence. Real strong correlation.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's a privilege, but these people are fearful.
Yeah.
They're afraid of getting there. It's the worst King event I was at is when they decided to go into Cicero, Illinois. And we marched all around. I never had any problem down south. We go into Cicero, and that's the first time I was ever afraid. Because those rednecks up there wanted to kill or felt so threatened.
Yeah.
So if you threaten a millionaire in Hyde Park or Winnetka, they're just going to tolerate or whatever. But you go down and threaten the working class person who's barely surviving, you got a problem.
Yeah.
And so it's the displacement that they're afraid of.
Yeah.
And we're being taken advantage of right and left over that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So basically it boils down to a propaganda war.
Okay. Yep.
And we're losing. The people are losing
Oh yeah, very
because
bigly.
we can't afford good PR agents.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
When I was in law school, I edited a newspaper, and I took the only editorial position against Vietnam in the country at that time. And my paper got an award for it. And I got threatened with the dean that I shouldn't write articles like that. And I had to lecture him on the Second Amendment. And I said, if that's the way you feel, I'm going to write a Second Amendment editorial.
Yeah.
So it calmed off. Now we see with the you see the divisiveness in the sex too with that movie. So for instance, I had this old guy, probably my age, and he was in his swimming pool. They had a swimming pool in the house. And little girls from next door were swimming in the pool. And the little girl next door made an allegation of improper touching. So we go through all kinds of investigation, things like that. And one of our investigators looks alongside, and they had some of these big truck inner tubes. And with experimentation and things like that, the girl finally admitted that it was the thing you put the air in, whatever they call, that was doing that, and not the old man.
Oh wow. Oof.
Now, the remarkable thing about that is, for centuries, people accused of crimes are presumed innocent. And I was facing an uphill battle there because the propaganda line in the DA's office and the press was, let's get this old guy, sexual predator, etc. And they were more willing to frame or prosecute and convict my old man to prove a point about sexual predators than they were to do justice. And that's what's wrong with the program now.
Yeah, yeah. How do you suppose, I mean, if we can't afford a PR, on the middle class, how are we supposed to go about changing the system?
Well, break out the guillotine. I don't know.
Yeah.
One of the things, media is down to 30 owners throughout the world, so it's controlled that way.
Oh yeah.
We don't have real investigative reporters.
Because they all get threatened, right?
Well, they're not threatened. It's with consolidation. The purpose of journalism now is to sell advertising, and some of these stories don't sell advertising.
Yeah.
They used to be in the newspaper business, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
And that's what you saw, sex and violence. And when I was making films, they did studies on how to keep audiences. And they found that when I started, you needed a zinger in your film, some act that would excite the crowd. Every 20 minutes, by the time I stopped, it was down to every 5 minutes. So you got that excitement. That's part of the addiction of the video games. I think it's related. I'm not sure, but it could be.
Oh yeah. Yeah. These days it's probably down to 30 seconds, Yeah. So do you want to talk about more about like maybe the systematic change of the difference in communication of domestic violence? It's so broad. How would we go about?
Well, I view it the same way as the Asian girl.
Yeah.
You got to understand the culture.
Yeah.
It's a communication problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, that's their way of communicating.
Yeah.
Some people, it's their way of foreplay.
Yeah.
Now, we might not approve it, but you've got to look more at causation.
Okay.
You can't say to some hillbilly with 6 kids on $100 a week income, if you slap your wife around, you're going to go to jail and lose your job. What's the poor wife going to do then? Particularly when you got a right wing that says we shouldn't have welfare.
Okay.
But
So,
nobody's talking about that
yeah.
because it's not on the agenda that everybody wants to make their points. And again, it's using the law as a communication device.
Yeah.
I used to tell prosecutors that pulled that shit, go take an ad out in the Denver Post or something. Don't use my client just to prove a point that may or may not be valid.
Yeah. So maybe different tiers of communication, you know, it shouldn't just be like fits all, one size fits all per se.
Well, there's another thing. Yeah, I had a peer review for this international drug journal.
Yeah.
And one of the articles I reviewed made the point that we're the only country in the world that doesn't have evidence-based legislation. We have propaganda-based legislation.
Yeah.
So this hits the press. Let's make a law about it. That is the press that will make a law about it. And facts be damned.
Yeah. Probably has to do with Hollywood and all the.
Well, that's always it's the narrowing of the information channels.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. How do you
Okay.
feel about that?
What?
The conversation.
I think it's. What do you think?
I think it's good. I feel like I forgot a notepad and a pen, so I'd like to do that so I can write down questions while you're talking.
You
Yeah.
can go through the tape and do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we can. Yeah, sure, we can do that. Next time I'll bring that.
But I thought this would be a good start of where we should go and what direction.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
The system, almost the systematic, like breakdown of differences and how we can start to look at it, maybe.
yeah, well, we need research on these things.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've studied through groups I belong to is government behavior and propaganda. I've looked into the CIA and their stuff quite a bit.
Yeah.
Got a big library on them.
Okay.
You've got School of the Americas that many church groups are against. They're training death squads in Central America. You have Propaganda Warfare Center at Fort McDill. Now, one of my acquaintances ran the remote viewing program. His name was General Stubblebine. And we used to talk about this type of stuff. But consider this. All of Nixon's inner cabinet, not all of them, but a good percentage, worked for Hill and Knowlton. They were PR people with law degrees.
Okay.
And Nixon had these an FBI series, Harrison or whatever, Treasury, had all these propaganda things, same way as Hitler did before World War II. They made propaganda movies, television shows.
Okay.
And then the war on drugs happened.
Yeah.
Now, what if the war on drugs had a secondary purpose? Because what you do is you try to stop, to interfere with movement politics. The drug thing started out with anti-war people, hippies, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started doing drug cases, there wasn't any organization. People would pull their money and go get a couple pounds in Tucson or something like that.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a kingpin. But to combat it, the Justice Department had to structure it and give it a structure.
Yeah.
Because you can't negotiate with a glob. And that's what they teach you in some of these schools. So now you structure it so you can combat it.
Okay.
And you make a bugaboo on the drug or whatever. And you associate drugs, marijuana particularly back then, with antisocial behavior. You correlate it with the anti-war movement. And then you structure that and you infiltrate and you try to break it up. So It wasn't until about middle of the first Nixon term that all of a sudden the DEA got formed and the policy changed where you had to rat off a buddy or else.
Yeah.
Before that, it was frowned on by the judges and everyone else. You just didn't do that. You take your medicine, you do the crime, you do your time.
Yeah.
And we'll have several conversations on that, the effect of that.
Okay.
But I think it maybe not started out that way, but it ended up as an experience on how to break up certain groups.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
The
that makes a
tactics
lot of sense. Yeah.
the tactics you can use on the drug people are the same.
Yeah.
And the
Wow.
more I got into how much government agencies were involved in drug trafficking, the more convinced I got.
Yeah. Yeah. Big time. Okay.
So we'll do some things about
Yeah.
that next time.
Okay. Yeah. Are you feeling a little under the weather?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
I'm a little tired of it.
Okay.
An hour of physical therapy and an hour here.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, that's a good place to get started. Are you available tomorrow?
Sure.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, I don't have to return this till tomorrow, and I mean, we could rerun it. I'd like to get as much, you know, what's the word I'm trying for? Sorry.
What are they charging you for that?
It's a little expensive. I'm gonna search around tonight and see if I can't find a little cheaper of one, because as long as my SD card will fit with another camera, I can use something else.
What's your SD card look like?
It is what was it called? I just bought it. It was a SanDisk Extreme Plus.